So what's the money quote regarding the U.S. Attorney's scandal? My vote goes to this one by Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, who told the senators at his confirmation hearing that he would, quote, never ever ask U.S. attorneys to step down for political reasons. This was a bald-faced lie, and perhaps ground for a perjury or contempt of Congress charge, as it has been clearly revealed that the reason for firing the 8 U.S. attorneys was that they weren't regarded as, quote, loyal Bushies, an actual term used in an email to Karl Rove. The attorneys were, in fact, fired because, among other reasons, they were not willing to blindly follow the party line by investigating and indicting Democrats while giving a pass to felonious Republicans. Once again, an administration in the White House gets itself into legal hot water not so much for the initial crime, but because of the lies and deceits in the cover-up. Reportedly, Gonzo has been spending days and days preparing his story for his appearances next week before the relevant congressional committees. Why would he have to strategize with GOP minders if he has nothing to hide? If he has done nothing wrong, all he has to do is tell the truth. And what of the loyal, bushy U.S. attorneys now in charge of their districts? Here are just 3. A judge ruled that an epic plea agreement blunder by recently appointed U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Taylor for the Washington, D.C. district in the largest tax prosecution ever means that the Treasury can't recoup at least $100 million in restitution. The judge, in a notable understatement, said, "This is a very poorly drafted agreement." U.S. Attorney J. Timothy Griffin, Eastern District of Arkansas, a protege of Karl Rove, made claims about his experience as an Army lawyer that have been put in doubt by military records. The 38-year-old Griffin claims on his official website that he prosecuted 40 criminal cases while at Fort Campbell, where he was stationed from September 2005 to May 2006. But Army authorities say Fort Campbell's records show Griffin only serving as assistant counsel on 3 cases, none of which went to trial. 4 top staffers under Rachel Paulos, District of Minneapolis, voluntarily demoted themselves to send a message to Washington, D.C. that 33-year-old Paulos, who, after just 4 months on the job, is way over her head. She has earned a reputation for quoting Bible verses and dictatorially dressing down underlings. Before being appointed to the plum U.S. Attorney post, Paulos, a graduate of Pat Robertson's Regent University Law School, was a special assistant to Alberto Gonzales. DOJ has had to dispatch a high-ranking minder to Paulos' office to help her out. And what about those U.S. attorneys, presumably certifiable Bushy loyal, that the administration permitted to stay on in their jobs? How are they working out? Here's one notorious example. Josh Marshall's Talking Points Memo website, which has been all over the U.S. Attorney's scandal from the very beginning, reports that in Milwaukee, an appeals court threw out the corruption conviction aimed at a state official close to the Democratic governor because the evidence supplied by the U.S. Attorney Steve Biskupic was, to quote the judges, both Republican appointed, quote, beyond thin, end quote. Bogus, in other words. Clearly, in this whole U.S. Attorney's story, we probably are viewing only the tip of the iceberg these days. What's to come from below the surface is bound to reveal a much wider, even worse scandal. Not surprising given the history of this administration. And the telltale quote that says it all about Bush and world climate change? Asked by an interviewer what he hoped his legacy in history would be, Bush expressed the ultimate solipsism: "I'll be dead." In other words, the future we help create for our children and grandchildren is of no importance, since either the apocalypse will come shortly or I'll be dead. So why should I bother my head worrying about what happens to others after I leave the scene? That self-involved attitude of denial and ethical narcissism has resulted in non-action when it comes to global warming climate change. I guess this week's money quote on Iraq comes from Senator John McCain, at one time a truth-telling maverick, but so desperate to occupy the White House that he drank the Bush Kool-Aid and became a raving supporter of all things hawkish in Iraq. Bush's escalation of the war, the so-called surge, is working so well, McCain told reporters that, quote, "There are neighborhoods in Baghdad where you and I could walk through, those neighborhoods today." Since so many reporters and military officers guffawed loudly when he uttered that whopper, he thought he'd do a demonstration walk to show how safe it is out there on the mean streets of inner Baghdad. What was McCain thinking? He did indeed take a stroll in a local marketplace, which he asserted was proof that one could walk freely in Baghdad. McCain, as photos revealed, was dressed in body armor and surrounded by 100 U.S. troops with American snipers on rooftops and at least 2 Apache helicopters overhead. That's walking freely. The following day, probably as a response to that bit of a photo op grandstanding, the insurgents turned that marketplace into a bloody charnel house, bombs and bullets killing 14 Iraqi civilians. The Iraqi rebels had a point of their own to make. McCain then tried to back away from his overstated optimism about the situation in Baghdad. The pro-escalation spin is, just give General Petraeus 6 months more. Haven't we seen this movie before in Vietnam and elsewhere? 6 months from now, the White House and its lackeys will claim that we're just about to turn the corner and ask for 6 more months. And then 6 months more, and then, well, looky here, there's a new administration in the White House, and now it's their problem. Goodbye! In the meantime, more U.S. troops will be surged into Iraq. Incompletely trained Army and Marine brigades sent back for yet another tour of duty, more reserves, more National Guard units, 13,000 are being activated right now for service in Iraq, etc., etc. Bush, in effect, is painting targets on their backs and sending them into a Civil War shooting gallery. The ostensible opposition party, the Democrats, can't quite decide how far and how fast to push for withdrawal from Iraq, and whether now is the time to initiate impeachment hearings of Bush and Cheney. So we'll be forced to watch thousands of young American men and women and Iraqi civilians get slaughtered and maimed until a new president reverses course and finally brings the troops safely home. That's America 2007 under Cheney Bush and far too timid Democrats. Disgraceful.